In my last little talk, I discussed how I became a psychologist, and I thought I would expand on that and talk about how I became a professor. And that was even more of a challenge than becoming a psychologist. And let me go back and mention something I didn't in the previous video. When I was growing up, I said I thought I might wanted to be either a dentist or a physician. And I was very focused on medical kinds of things. Uh, I mentioned that my father was a dentist and my grandfather was a physician. And I had my room in the house fixed up like a doctor's office. I had a fairly good sized desk that had actually been my grandfather's. And on top of the desk, I had, besides a lamp, I had a real modern looking globe. In fact, it had a satellite track around it. This was at the beginning of the space age, if you will. And behind my desk, I had this brick and board bookcase, and in it was filled with books about the human body. I had this Visible Man statue thing that I had put together, and it showed all the skeletal system and all the organs. I also had a skeleton hanging on a hook, not because I was into the occult or something, but because I was interested in the human body. I had this set of teeth that was hand carved out of ivory that my father had made when he was a dental student. And a lot of other science stuff. I had a pill bottle collection. Some kids collect stamps or insects or things like that. I collected empty medicine bottles, and I had hundreds of them. Whenever I would go to the doctor, or I was near a pharmacy or something, you got any empty pill bottles I can have? Now they all just kind of look the same because they actually take them out of a bigger one and put however many you're supposed to get in a smaller one. But I had this fascinating collection of all kinds of sizes and shapes of pill bottles. I don't know whatever happened to my pill bottle collection, but I eventually got rid of it. Probably about the time I was in seventh or eighth grade, something like that. I think it disappeared. And I had my grandfather's stethoscope back from when he was a physician. I had a bunch of tongue depressors that a nurse had given me, a whole box of them. And I was just really into all that stuff, and I really thought I wanted to go into some sort of medical specialty. Yeah, I was really thinking about dentistry, but medicine was on the back burner. And to a certain extent, becoming a psychologist was becoming a doctor of sorts. A doctor of psychology, not a doctor of medicine. And so, growing up, my room looked like that. In my previous video, I talked about how I actually ended up a psychologist. And kind of where I left off is I had become a school psychologist for the Austin Independent School District. While I was working on my doctorate, however, at Baylor, I taught undergraduate courses in educational psychology, and I really wanted to pursue a college teaching position. And I applied for a number of positions at colleges and got interviewed for them, but I didn't get any of the positions. One I interviewed for was at Tarrant County College in Fort Worth, and they were looking to hire somebody to be a half-time psychology professor, half-time counselor. And, that would have been ideal. I had a lovely interview with the chairman of the department who told me everything you could possibly want to know about her, but I don't think she learned hardly anything about me. I didn't get the position. I had a interview at the University of Dallas, and what came out of that was, they were looking for somebody with a little bit more practical experience than I had at that point. I had just gotten my doctorate, and they were saying, well, we're afraid you'd be too theoretical for us. I had an interview in the counseling center at SMU, but in reality, I was just as much interested in teaching as counseling. And I was asking the head of the counseling center, would there be an opportunity to me to teach some classes as an adjunct professor? Well, I didn't get that position either. And as I said in my previous video, I initially was a school psychologist for the Education Service Center Region 12 in Waco, and then I became a school psychologist for the Austin Independent School District. And I did that for 8 years. My first year, I had 4 elementary schools I was assigned to. And then after that, I would have I think my second year, I had 1 elementary school and 1 middle school, and I had 2 elementary schools, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. And then after that, eventually I had 2 high schools. In fact, the first year I was there, I was assigned to 4 schools and not just 3. But as time went by, they reduced the load so that by the end I had 1 elementary school, 1 middle school, and 1 high school. And the whole time I was doing that position, I was applying for college teaching positions. And at one point, I started supervising school psychology interns, first from Texas State University in San Marcos, and then from the University of Texas at Austin. And unlike so many other people in my position, I was not just doing clinical type work. I was also doing research and publishing papers. I was publishing articles in journals like the Texas Psychologist and a national one that had to do with school psychology. And I published a dozen or so articles in these journals because, to get a job in college teaching, you had to publish a lot of stuff. So I was doing this kind of thing. I was supervising interns, and I would apply for college teaching positions, about 24 a year. And this is before the days of the internet and having your own personal computer. So, I'd put together resumes and I would make copies of all these articles I had published, and I would send, a whole packet of information about myself to these colleges that I had applied for faculty positions at. And in the beginning, I mainly wanted a position at a well-known university that was kind of research-based, somewhere where the weather was nice. I had grown up in Wisconsin, and I didn't want to teach at a college where winters were terrible. So Texas, the Deep South, the West Coast, places like that. Everywhere I went on vacation with my wife, I would drag her to college campuses. And I would drop by, the psychology department and introduce myself to people and say, give them a little bit about my background and, spend a little time with them and say, if you have any openings, I'd really be interested in doing this. I got pictures of me out in front of the psychology building at UCLA and at USC and at the University of California at Santa Barbara, out in front of the building at the University of North Texas. Get this. Well, some of you aren't going to like this when you hear this. This is how pathetic I was, really. On my honeymoon, we went to New Orleans, and I had a job interview at Tulane University. During my honeymoon. We rode the streetcar from downtown out to Tulane, and my wife sat in the student lounge, the student union, while I had about an hour interview for this position at Tulane that I had read about in a psychology newspaper. And I said, well, I'm going to be in New Orleans. Can I come by? And they were like, yeah, sure. At the end of the interview, they told me, well, they had decided really they wanted to hire this guy who was already a professor at the University of Texas. Oh, great. Why didn't you tell me that at the beginning so I didn't leave my wife sitting for an hour in the student lounge, So anyway, I didn't get that position. And like I said, I would apply for 2 or 3 dozen a year. And, that was very time consuming and expensive, because I would ship out, a large size envelope with all kinds of extra postage, and I had spent all kinds of money on copying things, resumes and articles I had written and so on. And, for the most part, nobody gave me the time of day. I did have a telephone interview at California State University at Fullerton. And that was interesting because they had 2 openings, one in school psychology and one in counseling psychology. And I applied for the one in school psychology, and they interviewed me over the phone for the one in counseling psychology. Go figure. The guy who got the job instead of me has turned out to be one of the premier counseling psychologists in the country. In fact, I was teaching for a while at St. Edward's University, and one of the courses I taught was counseling psychology, and I used that guy's textbook. It was a fabulous book. Gerald Corey is his name. Great guy. So anyway, I would go to all kinds of psychology conventions. state conventions. I became very active in the Texas Psychological Association. I became very active in the American Psychological Association. I went to national conventions of the APA, and one in Anaheim, California, and I dragged my wife to that. I went to one in New Orleans when I had two little kids at home, but I was still trying to, and I would go to all the social hours and make small talk with all these people, and I wanted people to know who I was, and I tried to meet everybody I could. Whenever I would go to a convention, I would always chair a symposium or present a paper of some kind, so I was known. And I would apply for all these positions, and other than a handful, I never even got interviewed. And I couldn't understand what the problem was. I eventually said, and as I always tell my students, all psychologists get to the point where they want to do things their own way and they start a private practice. And so after finishing all my supervised experience I needed and my internship and passing the State Board of Examiners as psychologists and getting my license, I started a private practice in the evenings. And I had a good friend who was a gynecologist obstetrician who let me use his office rent-free in the evenings. I always say I got great stories I can tell you about having a private practice in a gynecology office. But that's where I got my start. And so, I'd work during the day for the school district. I'd get off about 4 or 4:30. I would then go over to my private office, or the gynecologist's office, that is, and I would use his private office to do counseling and things, and his break room and stuff I would use for psychological testing and things like that. And I would work Saturday mornings in his office and things like that. Eventually, as I always tell my students, there was a student at one of the high schools I was working at who was angry because she wasn't going to be valedictorian of her high school class, even though she was in the top 10 students. She hadn't taken as many AP classes and things as other people. And so she was angry, and she started sending death threats to the principal and the assistant principal. The assistant principal's first name was Jack, and she sent him a note one day that said, "Death be nimble, death be quick, forget the candlestick, kill Jack." Yeah. Well, when you do that, you get to meet the school psychologist. And as you could probably predict, this student already had a psychiatrist on the outside. And so I started consulting with him, and he and I really hit it off. And he suggested I should move my practice into his office, which I did. And he started giving me all kinds of referrals for psychological testing. He specialized in children and adolescents. In fact, he was the only child psychiatrist on both the city and state's health plan. So we had lots of people from all walks of life coming into our office, and I was doing lots of testing and lots of psychotherapy. He helped me acquire clinical privileges at several local psychiatric hospitals. And as I always say to students, the great thing about being a school psychologist is you get your summers off. So when summer came, I was working full-time in his office, and I was doing a lot of work in the hospital and in the office. And he taught me so much. I learned everything I know about family therapy from him, from working together with him on various cases. He meant so much to me. And by the way, as a school psychologist, I learned so much from Dr. Betty Phillips, who, after Darlene Kaufman retired, after I had been there a couple of years, Dr. Betty Phillips took over her position as supervisor of testing. And Betty had a PhD in clinical psychology from Harvard. And I'll tell you what, I knew a whole lot coming out of Baylor, Department of Educational Psychology, about IQ testing and educational testing and that sort of thing. But Betty taught me everything I knew about projective testing and a whole lot of additional things about psychological assessment that went beyond just objective tests, like the Minnesota Multiphasic Personality Inventory, where the client answers all these questions like, sometimes I hear and see things around me nobody else does, true or false kinds of things. I learned a lot about that sort of thing at Baylor, but when it came to things like the Rorschach inkblot test, the thematic apperception test, sentence completions, drawing tests, draw a person, draw a house, those kinds of things. What Betty taught me was first rate, and I owe a lot to her for that. So I was accumulating a whole lot of clinical experience. And, I got to the point where it pretty much looked like I was never going to get a faculty position. I also felt like my chances of getting a faculty position were very low because of politics, quite frankly. At the time, affirmative action was a big deal. And ads for faculty that appeared in various publications that I subscribed to literally said at the bottom of the ad, women and minorities are encouraged to apply. What does that mean? Well, if you're a white male, forget it. That's what it means. Imagine what would happen if somebody said, white males are encouraged to apply. All hell would break loose. That's totally not okay. But it's okay to say women and minorities are encouraged to apply. So, basically, I would apply for all these university positions, and 90% of them went to women. So I decided I'm never going to be a professor, even though I wanted to do that, even though that was kind of how I saw myself. I wanted to become like Dr. Lampkin, who was my mentor and favorite professor at Baylor. And, at one time he had been the director of guidance for the Los Alamos schools in New Mexico. So, he had plenty of clinical experience before he became a professor, and I had acquired so much clinical experience. I mean, by this time I had about 15 years of clinical experience. But it just seemed like it wasn't going to happen. And so for a while there, I thought about once writing a book about all the rejection letters I got. And I got to where I ranked schools based on their rejection letters. And something I found out was the more prestigious the university, the more impressive their rejection letters were. In fact, one of the most impressive rejection letters I got was from USC, University of Southern California. Oh, we're Dr. Rangard, we're impressed with your credentials, and unfortunately we picked this other person, but we'd like to keep your stuff on file because if we have another opening, we'd love for you to apply. It's like, oh yeah, sure, feel free to keep it. I got very impressive rejection letters from the University of Houston. Also, the higher level the position I applied for, the more impressive the rejection letter. I applied to be the chairman of the the educational psychology department at the University of Houston, and they sent me a beautiful rejection letter. The most pathetic rejection letters were from community colleges. In fact, a lot of them didn't even, you wouldn't just send them your resume, you'd have to fill out this long application, and then you wouldn't even hear back from them. The biggest insult of all was from Santa Barbara Community College, where after you filled out this lengthy application, it was about 10 pages. The last page, there was a postcard attached that you were supposed to fill out, self-address it, and put a stamp on it, and it was your rejection postcard. You addressed and stamped your rejection postcard. Can you imagine? I got to the bottom of the application and threw it away. I said, I'm just never going to be a professor, and I decided to really focus on being a psychologist. I ended up merging my private practice in psychology with a large psychiatric clinic that had their headquarters in Dallas. And, as a clinician, wow, they recruited me. The head of the clinic had me come up there on a Saturday, and he took the day to take me to lunch and take me on a tour of the college. Of the clinic, and he made me an offer like you can't imagine. It was the most money I had ever made in my life. They really wanted me. It's great to feel wanted. It's really great to feel wanted. And, they wanted me to be their director of testing. They wanted me to lead group therapy in the hospital on the weekends. They wanted me to work as a psychologist and do individual therapy in the clinic. They had a radio show. They had workshops they did. I was on a call-in radio show, a national show that they did. And in the meantime, I was continuing to do research and publish. I was continuing to do research on my patients. I authored a chapter in a law textbook on the psychologist's role in child custody cases. My credentials were getting more and more impressive, but no colleges were interested in me. By this time, I was, mid-40s, and they didn't. I just said, I'm putting everything into clinical work. Forget the college thing; it's just not going to happen. I had applied for, a part-time position at Austin Community College a couple of years before I decided to just forget about it. And, I didn't even hear anything back from them. But apparently that application and my resume ended up in a file somewhere. And I was 45 years old and coaching Little League Baseball. And I was getting ready to take my son to a ball game. And we were about to walk out the door and the phone rang. It was like 4:30 in the afternoon, in the middle of the summer. And normally I wouldn't even answer the phone, but I thought, it might be one of my players or one of their parents calling me about the game. And so I better answer the phone. So I picked up the phone. I tried to be as nice as I could. Hello. And this lovely voice on the other end told me that she was the head of the psychology department at the Rio Grande campus of Austin Community College. And was I still interested in a teaching position there? That they were looking to hire. And, at that point I thought, I don't know if I want to teach anymore or not, because you don't make that much money just teaching a course. And, my thinking when I had applied for the position was, I'll be a clinician and then I'll teach a class. But, they didn't seem interested in me. But when she told me it was a half-time position and I'd be teaching 3 classes, 2 different courses, Human Growth and Development and Intro to Psych, and that she had gone through files in the personnel office and she had gone through 150 applications and she had narrowed it to 3 people, and I was one of the 3. And could she interview me? And I'm like, sure. And so, and what's funny about this is I specialized in career counseling, one of the things I specialized in. And I always told my clients, you're never going to get a job just by filling out an application. You got to get to know people. I talked about how I networked my way into getting a position here or there. But, here I had done all this networking to try and get a college teaching position. It hadn't done me any good at all. Although I still have memories of going to a convention in California and meeting this lady who was a dean at the University of Iowa and saying to me, oh, we'd love to have you at Iowa. I thought, wow, that's, they got bad weather in Iowa, but what the heck, I can't get a position anywhere else. I got to where I was applying anywhere. I got to where I was applying for college teaching positions at places I didn't necessarily even want to go. But, it had gotten to the point where I'll go anywhere. And but they didn't have an opening at Iowa. So, here was somebody that, I had filled out this application like 2 years before and had forgotten all about it. And suddenly, they were going to interview me and several other people. And so, I went and met with her and told her my story and how much I wanted to teach and how I used to teach when I was working on my doctorate. And they really wanted somebody who had a good, strong private practice, who also, by this time, the clinic had broken up and I had gone back into private practice in Westlake Hills. And, they really wanted somebody who had a lot of practical experience and put the practical aspect into their teaching, and who had income from their other job, if you will, to where they could just work half time. I don't think she had the heart to hire somebody else after interviewing me. I think she was like the dean at Baylor, who just had a heart of gold and just caved into my story. And so, I got hired. I'll never forget, before I started that position, she sent me a note and she said, welcome back to college teaching. It just meant so much to me. Well, after I had taught those classes at ACC for about 2 years, opportunity came along to also teach classes at St. Edward's University. Someone who was working there, who had a history of some personal trauma and was getting counseling from someone in private practice that at one time had been associated with me at the clinic. And this student mentioned to this guy, to this psychologist, that, St. Ed's was looking for somebody to teach tests and measurements. And the psychologist said, no one in Austin knows more about psychological testing than Dr. Grangard. And so I got this call out of the blue from the dean at St. Edward's. And she said, can you come here and teach tests and measurements? And, it's like, wow, this is the course I've always wanted to teach. This is my specialty. Yes. And so, I went there and met with the dean of social and behavioral sciences. And so I was going to be teaching 3 classes at ACC and 1 at St. Ed's. But then she gave me another call and she said, we've had more students sign up for child psychology than we got space, and we need to spin off another section. Could you also teach child psychology? You bet I can. And so, now I was teaching Intro to Psych at ACC, and like 2 sections of that. I was teaching a section of Human Growth and Development at ACC, and the same semester I was teaching tests and measurements at St. Edward's, and I was teaching child psychology at St. Edward's. 5 courses, that's a full load. Plus I was doing my private practice. And this continued for a number of years, where I was, for the next 5 years, I was teaching at ACC and at St. Ed's. In fact, it got to the point where I only had time to do my private practice on Fridays, and I was only bringing in enough money to cover my overhead. Really, all my money that I was making was from college teaching. And then an opportunity came along to, and by the way, at St. Ed's, I was teaching all kinds of courses. I was teaching in-class sections of child psychology and tests and measurements and counseling. I was teaching some seminar sections in things like abnormal and adolescent psychology and social psychology. At ACC, I started teaching social psychology. So it got to where I was teaching like 3 classes at ACC and 4 at St. Ed's. And opportunities came along to possibly go full-time at one of the colleges or the other. I interviewed for a position at ACC to do career counseling. As I mentioned, I had done a lot of that. And, I thought if I could work half-time as a career counselor at ACC, and then teach the rest of the time, that would be great. As it turned out, some things changed, and we got a new dean of students at ACC, and I always like to say, she may be the only person that thoroughly read and studied my resume, and she discovered I could do way more than just career counseling. There's all kinds of stuff I could do. And she hired me half-time to to do counseling and advising in the Office for Students with Disabilities. And then the other half of the time I would continue to teach. By the way, prior to this, there was a semester where they had classes that needed to be covered and nobody to teach them. And I was temporarily full-time at ACC, just teaching. But, when that semester was over, I reverted back to just being an adjunct. So anyway, it got to the point where now I had an opportunity to work in counseling and teach. And by having 2 half-time positions like that, it got me health benefits and all that kind of stuff. So, at that time, I dropped I closed my private practice, and I just started working at ACC full-time. And, I was mostly teaching human growth and development, intro to psych, and then I started teaching human sexuality. They had a section that was full of students, and they had no one to teach it. And the chairman of the department called me up and said, can you teach that course? And I went and looked at the textbook, and I thought, well, I'm already teaching half of this stuff in other courses, and I certainly have encountered lots of this other stuff in my clinical experience. So yeah, I can teach that. And so I taught that course for about 15 or 16 years at ACC. I loved all of that work. What did I like better, the counseling or the teaching? I think it was equal. Counseling and advising students who had some kind of disability. I don't know how much I helped them compared to how much they helped me. They were so inspirational. So inspirational. I just loved working with those students. And at the same time, I really enjoyed teaching my classes. I always like to say, I'm not sure if I learned more from the students or they learned more from me. Particularly teaching human sexuality. I would talk about various movies and show some video clips, and students would say, "Oh, you need to watch this movie, you need to watch that movie, and this is a perfect illustration of this concept or that concept." Had so much fun, and I can't begin to tell you how many technical problems I would have in the classroom. The longer I taught, the more I had to deal with technology issues in the classroom. Suddenly I was doing PowerPoint lectures and using microphones and doing this and doing that. And the thing about ACC was every classroom in every building seemed to have a different setup and a different set of equipment. And what worked one place didn't work somewhere else. And there would be times when I'd be like, I don't know how to get it to work. And the students, I'd say, can anybody help me? There'd be a student would come up to the front and say, try this, try that. And sure enough, it worked. I couldn't have survived without students. I absolutely loved teaching college. And I got to the point where I reviewed textbooks for major textbook authors. I got on editorial committees for textbooks. I authored the practice tests for a textbook that it was going to be shrink wrapped with and accompany a textbook by the leading psychology instructor probably in the whole country, Dr. Philip Zimbardo at Stanford University. I was invited to attend. The publishers would fly me to special meetings. A number of years ago, there was one particular publisher had invited what they considered to be some of the top professors in the country, and they flew them all to Chicago for kind of a brainstorming session. One night we had dinner at a fancy restaurant, and then the whole next day they broke us up into groups and we talked about what we were doing that was so effective. I got invited to participate in things like that. There were a number of things like that I got invited to participate in. And I got to meet all of these textbook authors, and suddenly I found myself doing all the things that I had hoped to do one day. Being a college professor has been a dream come true, I guess you could say. but it was long in coming. And you know, the whole first half of my career, I was a clinician. And I think it's because I was a clinician that I've been as effective as I've been as an instructor. Because I've been able to back everything up that we've talked about with a real life example. And a number of years ago, I was given a teaching award. And, you know, that was very special to me. So that's been my college teaching career. I've been at it now for 26 years. And, you know, that was, if you've added it all up, yeah, I'm 101. But it's been a worthwhile career. And I think one of the things that I've especially enjoyed as a college professor is getting to know students from all walks of life. And I've had so many international students in my classes, from every imaginable country. And, you know, to have them end up in my office, you know, once I was counseling and teaching, I got my own office, whereas most adjuncts don't have an office. And, you know, besides the students I was counseling, the students I had in class were dropped by and talked to me about everything and anything. And it was such a meaningful experience for me. So it was long in coming. It was a difficult road to get here. And in the end, I just think it was meant to be. You know, I don't think it was anything I was able to do to get to where I'm at. I have a real spiritual side to myself, and I can't help but think this was God's plan for my life. To be a clinician, to be a professor, and to have very meaningful relationships with people from all walks of life. Thanks.